Hello Orchid friends, welcome back to my channel. Wherever you are, I hope you're having a great day, staying healthy and staying safe. Today we're looking at one of my rescue orchid. This orchid was gifted to me because it was severely dehydrated and the previous owner did not know how to take care of it. So I took over and it's been at least 2 years, I believe, because this is the second rebloom in my possession under my care. So it's done quite well since then, but you know, I will give you a short rundown of the story later. So as you can see here, it's grown in a cup with no drainage holes, and it's just moss medium, and the moss is really just a little bit. It's not a whole lot, so it's a moss, no drainage hole kind of method. At the time when I got this orchid, it was very dehydrated and I did not want to use water culture method to try on this orchid because at the time I already had a few and I didn't want to use the same method just for the sake of rescuing an orchid. And so I wanted some method that would allow me to keep this orchid moist for a longer period of time, but without me having to always observe the relationship between or the growing condition between the roots and the water. So I thought, you know, I'm just gonna go ahead and use moss, but then whether there is a drainage hole or not, I was on the fence. But because at the time I was still trying to find a better way to understand if the moss no drainage hole method can work in my environment, so that was the method I chose. So this orchid, if you see in the video, this orchid does not really have a very good display because it somehow has this really weird branch that happened. Even though it gave me 7 flowers, it was just, I don't know, I was not very happy with the display, but at least it bloomed. So I think I'll just leave it at that. So going back in time, this was probably a couple months after I put it in this setup, and it, you know, basically decided that it liked it and started to grow lots of roots. So that was a very good sign. I was really happy that it responded so well to this growing method. So initially, I always gave this orchid a lot of water, and then more than enough water actually, let it soak. And then what I would do is, when it's done soaking, I would tilt the cup enough for the water to flow out, and then patiently let the water drip until there's no more dripping, and that's when I know I can just put this orchid back where it was. So the water amount was always a lot more than it receives today. But that worked because I think that orchid, this orchid at that time needed much more water to stay hydrated, or to rehydrate itself actually. So that's what I did. And then gradually, as this orchid did better, I decided that I want to cut back on the amount that I give to this orchid every single time. So that's what I did. And so since then, I have changed the water amount to anywhere between 1/4 cup to 1/8 of a cup, depending on the season and the humidity as well as temperature in my environment. And now we're gonna fast forward. What you're about to see, this is the now, and by now I mean the photos that I've taken from this particular flowering cycle. So it's doing really well, growing roots, growing leaves, putting out a spike. So I think this method is definitely a good method for this particular orchid. As far as whether I will repot it and change setup, I probably won't until the moss is ready to be replaced. That will be the time that I start looking for a different method if I decided to change the method. In terms of fertilizer, I only give this orchid quarter strength fertilizer, so that's 25% compared to the recommended 100% dosage. And how I make the 25% concentration is, for example, if it's 1 teaspoon to 1 gallon, I either reduce the amount of the fertilizer to 1/4 of a teaspoon to 1 gallon, or I keep the fertilizer to 1 teaspoon but then increase the water amount to 4 gallon, from 1 gallon to 4 gallon. And of course, this all depends on how much water you want to prepare, how much fertilizer solution you want to prepare. And how do you decide how much? Well, it depends on how you water your orchids and how many orchids you have. Some people share water with their orchids, so maybe 1 gallon is good for, however many orchids that you want to share waters with. But for me, I don't share water, and because I have just a little bit over 100 orchids, so I decide to do about 2 gallons, and then that will be enough. Maybe sometimes even 3 gallons of water, but it really depends on how you do it and how many orchids you have. Personally, I think it's best not to share water with your orchids, because in case there is any kind of disease, pests, viruses, you're not jeopardizing of cross-contaminating, and that way each orchid has its own cup, its own water, its own sort of micro ecosystem going on. I think that's the best. But if you really know your orchids well and you know that there's absolutely no chance or small chance that you're willing to take the risk, you can definitely share the water, just conserve water, because water is one of those things that we should not waste. So just something to think about as you plan for your routine. Another thing about orchid amount is I always get this question, a lot of new subscribers that ask me how many orchids do I have, and they see that I still have a lot of space on my rack and on my windowsill, and am I going to get more orchids? And the answer is probably not, because right now with these orchids I'm already spending about maybe 90 minutes, an hour and a half for each watering cycle every week. And because I have a full-time job elsewhere, this is just what I do for fun. I am not a full-time YouTuber, and I don't intend to be, so why do I want to get more orchids to burden myself with all these watering? I mean, if I were full-time doing this, fine, but this is just a hobby. So this should be something that I do for fun, something I enjoy, and I don't treat this like a business. I don't treat these orchids as my job, and that's why no, I'm not going to get more orchids. Anyway, just some thoughts around orchid growing in general, but hopefully you enjoyed this video and this orchids bloom this time. This is all I have for you today. If you like this video, please give it a thumbs up, and if you would like to get more orchid related videos from my channel, please subscribe and turn on the notification. I want to wish you happy growing, and I will talk to you in my next video.